month, I stood up and I said, this is going to come to a neighborhood near you. Well, we're here. And let me tell you something, New Yorkers. This issue will destroy New York City. Destroy New York City.
That was New York City Mayor Eric Adams exactly 1 year ago after the city had received 110,000 asylum seekers. But since then, over 200,000 have passed through the city, and the current shelter population sits stagnant at around 60,000 individuals, many of whom fled extreme poverty but still find themselves in it as they cannot get jobs or earn a living. And it seems like nobody wants to answer the question as to whether or not this crisis is destroying New York City. So I will.
Hundreds of people taking over the intersection of 25th Avenue and 86th Street to stop a homeless shelter from opening.
Now we're getting people from all over the globe have made their minds up that they're going to come through the southern part of the border and come into New York City. Every community in this city is going to be impacted.
There's no more room at the inn, but he should have said this a couple of years ago.
New York City moving to drastically shrink a growing migrant encampment. The city has been combating rogue encampments and complaints about violence.
When the migrants can't work, what are they going to do? Well, they'll do, illegal work, but they'll also do some crime, and we've had that.
They have seen a mammoth increase in these moped robberies and muggings.
A wave of migrant crime has washed over our city, but by no means do the individuals committing these crimes represent the vast number of people coming to New York to build a better life.
Never in my life have I had a problem that I did not see an ending to.
So a year after the asylum crisis began, New York still can't decide if it wants to be a sanctuary city. But what's worse is that nobody realizes most of the problems the asylum crisis is taking the blame for were already issues in New York City to begin with, because the majority of the 200,000 who've come here seeking asylum did not do so to join gangs or steal things from places like CVS. Yet we hear of reports of rising crime in areas of town that have asylum shelters. But at the same time, many New Yorkers are perfectly okay with our criminal justice reforms, which observers say have a lot to do with why we've got an out-of-control retail theft problem here. And while shoplifting now costs our state $4.4 billion worth of negative economic activity every year, that massive number has been growing since long before the asylum crisis even started. And when you combine surging theft with a surging number of violent offenders who keep getting released after being arrested, it looks like New York City hasn't exactly been heaven on earth prior to the asylum crisis. But then there's the cost of this whole thing, and the city's already spent $5 billion caring for asylum seekers. And since money doesn't grow on trees, it has to come from cuts to the city's budget, affecting things like law enforcement, education, sanitation, you name it. There's been an impact, and some residents say their communities are not the same. A subject which has become even more controversial after internal documents leaked revealing that New York City's shelters are overwhelmingly set up in middle-class and low-income neighborhoods. Which brings us to the real reason why Mayor Adams said what he said a year ago. He said he'd never seen a crisis before that had no ending, and every single week more people arrive in the city on buses from the border who are gonna need a place to stay. And as long as that keeps happening, there will always be an asylum crisis here to some extent, which makes it look like the mayor is right. This very well could go on forever unless the city makes some serious changes. But as you're about to see, many of those changes, no matter how simple they are, they go against New York's DNA as a progressive sanctuary city, which means they probably won't happen. But does that mean this crisis really will destroy New York? There are two issues that come to mind when people think of the asylum crisis, and those are the costs associated with this crisis and what critics say is rising crime attributed to the crisis. And there is very much still debate in New York over whether or not we can truly afford this for an indefinite period of time. And there's also debate over the crime connection because, again, most of the people that have come here are not here to do anything wrong.
When the migrants can't work and they're able-bodied and they're sitting around, what are they going to do? They'll do illegal work, but they'll also do some crime, and we've had that.
So the first thing we have to discuss here is crime, because although there are people who live in shelters that have been arrested committing crime, most of the folks that live in those shelters didn't show up here to join gangs or steal things from Macy's. Yet retail theft is a huge problem, and there are local businesses that have reported spikes in crime after shelters were set up in their very same neighborhoods. Which brings up a big question. Why is this happening? Is it really because of the asylum seekers? Well, even though some asylum seekers have indeed stolen things, observers say that that the real culprit here isn't the asylum crisis. No, in fact, it's New York City's decriminalization efforts that over the last 4 years have made it so that things like stealing are just a misdemeanor. Because if you make something like stealing under $1,000 worth of stuff not a jailable or bailable offense, a small minority of people will take advantage of that system and become criminal recidivists who steal things over and over again and do not stop even after their 5th or 6th arrest. In fact, many recent studies showing the negative effects of New York's decriminalization efforts include statistics before the asylum crisis was even a thing. And what's essentially been created here are get-out-of-jail-free cards that we're just handing out to criminals who are here no matter what their background is. The other problem is that retail theft is fueled by an active marketplace for low-priced items, which you'll find at the other end of an internet connection or in many cases on various street corners throughout New York City right now. Because although selling things on the side of the road is illegal, the city doesn't seem to be doing anything about it, which many people say has created the perfect environment for somebody who wants to be a criminal and make a living stealing things to do it. And it looks like this is a problem New York City may have created all by itself in advance of any humanitarian crisis. And there's plenty of proof around us that rampant crime and lawlessness have been here for a very long time and have only been growing behind the scenes. And one of those proofs is how our justice system treats those who are arrested for violent crime. And when several asylum seekers were released without bail after attacking police, the world was shocked. Yet releasing people who attack the police has been business as usual here for a long time. And the fascinating thing about that is the entire asylum crisis would probably appear very different if New York were known as a law and order city. If New York were in the habit of incarcerating its violent criminals instead of setting them free, none of these complaints would even exist. And there are some who say that the only reason New Yorkers, some of them anyways, care now about crime is because some asylum seekers have committed crime. Where was all this attention to justice when we were chanting to defund the police? Either way, people are now realizing that our justice system does not send the proper message to those who wish to do us harm. Instead, it gives them every signal possible that what they're doing will not be punished and they can probably get away with it.
A wave of migrant crime has washed over our city. But by no means do the individuals committing these crimes represent the vast number of people coming to New York to build a better life.
So, is there a crime wave? Yes, but the NYPD says that it's just a small number of people who are causing it. And every time we catch those people, oftentimes they get released and they keep doing it, making it a much bigger problem than any of it would have to be if the city would do something about it. And this is almost forcing everyone here to admit that if we're gonna defund our police and increase the size of our population, how could we not expect there to be some increase in crime no matter where those people are from? And how could we not expect criminals to find areas of opportunity for more crime, like a recently discovered opportunity in Central Park where several people were robbed, leading to an increased police presence in the park, which has relocated resources from other parts of town where there could be crime waves in the future because we don't have enough police to keep the entire city safe at once. And before the Central Park crime wave, we had a crime wave at restaurants targeting patrons who were eating out on the side of the street, and before that we had a crime wave in our subway system, which was experiencing 6 felonies every single day until 1,000 police plus the National Guard were sent underground to stamp it out. They're also still down there now at some stations. And if you pull those police out to deal with a massive protest or something, criminals will look for and exploit that opportunity as soon as they see it, and crime will go right back up in the subway. But all of this has many people pointing out that the only way you get to become a progressive sanctuary city is if you're already a progressive city that has gone through things like criminal justice reform. But the problem is, doing that doesn't really make New York a sanctuary for immigrants at all, because many of the people who've come here fleeing poverty and crime now find the very same criminals in this city doing the same things they did back home. But for many asylum seekers, New York City now is home. And right now we're caring for about 60,000 individuals who are in shelters right now, which many say isn't exactly affordable or sustainable, which means we've now got to answer the question about the cost of this crisis. Could that be enough to destroy New York City? Some people think so. So here we are at one of the city shelters. The entrance is hidden over here, but it's a former office building here in Midtown called the Candler Building. And no matter which shelter someone stays at, the cost seems to be averaging out to around $380 per person per day that they are in the city's care. Which means this costs the city $22 million a day. A number many people say is unsustainable.
The Social Services Commissioner revealed at a city council hearing yesterday that the average cost per night of caring for a single migrant household, known as the per diem rate, stands at $388. That's $5.
So some studies have the cost at $380 per family, others have it at $380 per person. Either way, this crisis has cost $5 billion since it began. But that $5 billion, where has it gone? It hasn't been given directly to the asylum seekers, no. Instead, it's been spent on their behalf, given to the owners of places like this that had no purpose before this crisis sprang up. And what was the purpose of spending all that money? Well, it was supposed to enable homeless shelters like this to do what they're supposed to do, to help people get back on their feet so that they can live on their own and be members of society independently of any source of external funding. But since we're still caring for around 60,000 people on a daily basis, that obviously hasn't been happening. And this is magnified by the fact that many people are still coming here every single week looking for shelter for the very first time. And what that means is even though the city now has a rolling eviction plan where adults are evicted after 30 days and families after 60 days, as they leave, new people still come into the shelters and they will remain full of people. And even though many are on their way here right now fleeing extreme poverty and persecution, it doesn't seem like these shelters are doing them much good if they have to evict people before they're ready to leave on their own terms. As is evidenced by the massive crowds you'll see outside many of the city's facilities of able-bodied people who cannot integrate with our economy, either due to lack of work permission or worse, lack of employment opportunities. Which is strange because for a long time we kept hearing about how New York City needed workers and how we had shelters full of workers who were just waiting to get started. And although in theory this is a great idea, we could really use some of these jobs right now. Where are they? Because we've got a lot of people who've been here long enough to get work permission and haven't been able to earn a living. Sadly, there are only so many delivery jobs, only so many construction jobs, and many asylum seekers aren't having much luck with our job sector. Which is why many of the city's shelters, which were initially just supposed to be temporary, are now likely permanent.
It's estimated, in a couple of years, if we can't sustain it, it's going to cost $12 billion, not million, $12 billion. We're paying for everything. We're even giving them free legal service.
So $12 billion, that's not chump change, and in order to spend money that comes out of the city's budget towards a big expense, they've got to cut other parts of the budget: law enforcement, education, sanitation, you name it. If it's a city agency, it's probably experienced some sort of cut as a result of all this. Now, overall, things are still relatively peaceful. The street's not on fire behind me, but you do have neighbors saying that their communities are not the same. But there would be even more cuts if the city weren't trying to find the cheapest facilities it could locate to use as shelters, and unfortunately those are often found in less affluent areas of town. This is why some of the city's richest neighborhoods have zero shelters at all and aren't likely to have any in the near future, even as the city continues looking for new facilities. But even though there's incredible controversy over the placement of most of New York City's shelters, along with the duration of how long they are likely to be there, New York doesn't exactly have the best track record when it comes to spending money. And many of New York City's contracts with various providers for the asylum crisis have been no-bid contracts, which means those contracts are bigger than they would have been had several smaller companies all had to compete and submit their own bids, with the city picking the one that looked like it was going to be the best bang for their buck. But this is an emergency humanitarian crisis, and proponents of how the city has been dealing with it say, look, if 10,000 people show up in 1 month and all need a place to stay, they're going to have to act pretty quickly. There may not be time for an official bidding, vetting process for every single thing that requires spending, or people are going to be sleeping out on the streets, which nobody wants. But even though it's shocking that some of these huge tent facilities cost millions of dollars every single month and are just tents sitting in a big field, there are other ways the city's been wasting money that have nothing to do with the asylum crisis, which means that some of the cuts to the fire department and the police department may have been avoided had the city been more responsible to begin with. Like that time last year when the city decided to plant trees in the middle of a sidewalk, defeating its ability to let people walk down it and get places, which meant that the city had to spend even more money patching up the massive holes they dug in the middle of the sidewalk. But if you think planting trees that cost thousands of dollars each in the middle of a sidewalk so that people have to walk around them and so that waste collects in them is a dumb idea, that's nothing compared to the $100 million plan the city has to set up a call center full of doctors and nurses who will answer phone calls instead of seeing patients directly, giving out cursory health information over the phone to anyone who's able to get through. And they're gonna do this at a time when we've got a shortage of doctors and nurses in our physical hospitals, yet we're gonna stick them all in an office where they can't see patients and they just give out information that somebody could probably look up on a computer for $100 million. Yes, these are just two of many possible examples, but it should be clear that our city flushes money down the toilet like it ain't no thing. And this is money that could be used to refund our police departments, our libraries, our education facilities. This is money that could be used to provide better care for asylum seekers, possibly even along with training to help them get set up and integrated with our economy. And you want to hear something ridiculous? The city's comptroller, Brad Lander, he came out at the end of last year with a report that said that the asylum crisis would be affordable if the city were responsible with all of its other finances. That's insane. That's how much money we're wasting. And what that reveals is it's pretty unlikely that the asylum crisis is going to destroy New York City. Because as we've just covered, New York has been working on that all by itself for decades before there even was an asylum crisis here in the city. What do you think about that? Are New York City's other laws the real problem here? Would this be a very different environment if, in addition to being a sanctuary city, New York were also a law and order city? Let me know what you think. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.